cinematography, lighting ratios are one of the most powerful tools for controlling the mood, depth, and drama in a scene. Mastering them allows you to guide the viewer's emotions and create professional-looking shots. Whether you aim for soft beauty lighting or a high-contrast, dramatic effect. Understanding how to manipulate these ratios will help you achieve your creative vision. So join me as we explore this fundamental aspect of cinematography and discover how to use it effectively in your own work. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about lighting ratios. They're one of the most important concepts in cinematography, and I get asked about them all the time. You may have seen videos like this one where they explain ratios as the difference in intensity between your key light and your fill light. While that's true, I think it's only part of the story. So today we're going to cover three things. First, what is a lighting ratio and how is it different than just setting your exposure? Second, common lighting ratios and their meanings. And third, how to actually measure lighting ratios so that you can dial them in. Let's get into it. So first off, what is a lighting ratio and why should you care? In the simplest terms, a lighting ratio tells you how intense the shadows in your shot will be. But it's important to remember that your camera doesn't really care about the actual brightness of your shot. It's only about the relative brightness between the shadow areas and the highlight areas. If both are equally bright, it will look flat and boring. If the shadows are darker in comparison to the highlights, it will create more depth and drama. So controlling this relationship between light and dark helps you to sculpt the mood and atmosphere of your shot. The lighting ratio is the relationship between the intensity of the key light and the fill light. It is expressed as a ratio, such as 2:1 or 4:1, showing how much brighter one light source is compared to the other. Here are some common ratios and what they mean. A 1:1 ratio means that both the key and fill lights are equal in intensity. This creates a very flat, low-contrast look with even brightness across the frame. This type of lighting is often used in TV commercials, music videos, or talk shows. It can also be used creatively to make a character or object stand out more. A 2:1 ratio means that the key light is twice as bright as the fill light. This is the most natural and balanced look that approximates natural lighting conditions outdoors. When shooting at 2:1, the fill light should never be brighter than the key light. This is a rookie mistake that will lead to murky, undefined images. A 4:1 ratio means that the key light is 4 times brighter than the fill light. This creates a more noticeable contrast with darker shadows and brighter highlights. This ratio is often used for drama, action films, or scenes with high stakes. An 8:1 ratio and higher means that the key light is 8 times brighter than the fill light, and so on. These ratios create very high contrast with deep dark shadows and intensely bright highlights. This is commonly used in film noir movies, thrillers, or horror films. Some filmmakers will use lower ratios to create softer, friendlier, or more romantic looks. For example, a 1:1 ratio can give a dreamy, ethereal look that's often used in music videos or fashion films. A 2:1 ratio is often used for corporate videos or documentaries because it gives a more natural and authentic feel. Higher ratios are often used in dramas, thrillers, or horror films because they create a more mysterious, suspenseful, or intense look. You can also play with ratios to emphasize certain parts of the frame. For example, if you want to draw attention to a character's face, you could use a higher ratio to create more contrast and depth. On the other hand, if you want to create a more even lighting, you could use a lower ratio. It's important to remember that there is no right or wrong ratio to use. It all depends on the visual style you're going for and the message you want to convey. Experiment with different ratios to find what works best for you and your project. Now let us discuss how to measure lighting ratios so that you know what ratio you're actually getting. There are two main ways to do this. The first is with a handheld light meter, which is probably the most common method. There are many different types of light meters, but they all do the same thing. Measure the intensity of light. When using a light meter, you need to measure the light on both the key light side and the fill light side of your subject. To do this, place the light meter on a tripod at the same height as your camera and point it towards your subject. Take a reading on the key light side and then move the light meter to the fill light side and take a reading. Once you have both readings, subtract the lower number from the higher number, and that is your lighting ratio. For example, if you get a reading of 200-foot candles on the key light side and 50-foot candles on the fill light side, you would subtract 50 from 200. and get a ratio of 4:1. Another way to measure lighting ratios is by using the histogram on your camera. This method is a bit more complicated, and not all cameras have a histogram function, but it can be very helpful if you don't have a light meter. To do this, you need to shoot test exposures on both the key light side and the fill light side of your subject. Then look at the histogram on your camera and see how much of the image is in the highlight and shadow areas. The greater the difference between the two, the higher the lighting ratio. Now, there are a few things to keep in mind when measuring lighting ratios. First, make sure that your camera is set to the correct exposure settings. You don't want to over or underexpose your footage, because that will affect the accuracy of your lighting ratio. Second, try to get the most accurate readings possible. If you're using a light meter, make sure it is positioned correctly and taking into account any reflections or other factors that could affect the reading. If you're using a histogram, make sure you're re-looking at the correct part of the graph and taking into account any camera settings that could affect the readings. Third, be aware of the dynamic range of your camera. Cameras have a limited dynamic range, meaning that they can only capture a certain amount of light before it becomes too bright or too dark. If you're shooting in a high contrast environment, you may need to adjust your camera settings to ensure that you're recapturing all the details in the shot. Lighting ratios are a great tool for creating mood and atmosphere in your shots, but don't forget about the importance of skin tones. In addition to making sure that your lighting ratios are within the dynamic range of your camera, you also want to make sure that the lighting isn't too harsh or too soft. Harsh lighting can create unflattering shadows on faces and make it difficult to see details in the shot. Soft lighting can make your shot look flat and lifeless. The ideal lighting for skin tones is soft and even, creating a healthy glow without unwanted shadows or highlights. Here are some quick tips for achieving good skin tones in your cinematography. First, try to avoid having any light sources directly in front of your subject. This can create a harsh shadow on the background and make it difficult to see details in the shot. Instead, try placing your key light off to the side, or using a diffuser to soften the light. Second, try to avoid having any light sources directly behind your subject either. This can create a halo or flare on the subject's face, making it difficult to see details in the highlights. Try placing your fill light off to the side, or using a flag to block the light from hitting your subject. Third, use a reflector to bounce light onto your subject's face. This can help to fill in any shadows and create a more even lighting. Fourth, use a diffusion filter on your lens. This can help to soften the light and create a more natural look. Fifth, adjust your camera settings to make sure that you're capturing all the details in the shot. Make sure that you not over or underexposing your footage, and that you taking advantage of the dynamic range of your camera. All right, now that you know how to measure lighting ratios and get good skin tones, here are some examples of lighting ratios in action in real-world scenarios. In a low-contrast environment, like a cloudy day, you may need to use a higher lighting ratio to create enough contrast to make the shot interesting. In this case, you could use a 4:1 ratio or higher to create more dramatic shadows and highlights. In a high-contrast environment like a sunny day, you may need to use a lower lighting ratio to prevent the shot from becoming too contrasty and losing its detail in the highlights or shadows. In this case, you could use a 2:1 or 1:1 ratio to create a flatter, more even lighting. No matter what the environment, always remember to consider skin tones and make sure that the lighting isn't too harsh or too soft. So there you go. It's everything you need to know about lighting ratios. Now that you understand how to use lighting ratios to control the look and feel of your shots, you're well on your way to becoming a master cinematographer. But wait, there's more to come. Stay tuned for the next episode in our series where we'll dive into the art of motivated lighting. Till then, keep shooting and good luck.